Welcome in, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I love to see all the beautiful faces that we do recognize and then some that we don't. But thank you for joining us. It's going to be such a great class. There's a lot that he's going to cover tonight. So let me just introduce Dr. Rapoli if you have not met him before. He's the clinical director here at Jacksonville Health and Wellness Center and has over 25 years of clinical experience. Turning it over to you.
Awesome. We have a nice crowd here tonight. Thank you guys for coming out tonight. We have a lot to cover. I want to really make sure that you guys are well informed about these new dietary guidelines that just came out from the Trump administration. The whole way that this is being presented, right? There's some controversy around it. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of the positives and negatives. And hopefully we can open up a discussion because some of this information can be controversial. And so, if you agree with me or don't agree, I would love to hear from you guys and your thoughts, at the end. But I'm going to present a lot of the science and debunk some of the information that they presented. I'm actually going to show you the actual guidelines first, so that way you can actually see what they are. And then we're going to go to my PowerPoint presentation and we're going to kind of pick it apart, and I'm going to show you what the science actually says. So I'm going to share my screen here. So it's actually a short document. It's 10 pages long, and I appreciate the fact that they're trying to keep it simple. So I love that. It's a reverse pyramid, and you can see protein, dairy, healthy fats are kind of at the top, along with fruits and vegetables. And then at the bottom of the pyramid, we have whole grains. And so we're going to go through some of the recommendations here. So the first one here is prioritizing high quality, nutrient dense protein foods as a part of a healthy dietary pattern. Consume a variety of protein foods from animal sources. And let me just see if I can mark this here. Yeah, consume a variety of protein foods from animal sources, including eggs, poultry, seafood, and red meat, as well as a variety of plant sources, protein foods, including beans, peas, lentils, legumes, nuts, seeds, and soy. Swap deep fried cooking methods with baked, broiled, roasted, stir-fried, or grilled cooking methods. Consume meat with no or limited added sugars, refined carbs, or starches, or chemical additives. And the biggest thing, and we're going to look at some of the research behind these numbers here, but the protein servings has jumped from 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram to 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram. And we do live in the United States, and they are still using kilograms. I mean, the rest of the world does, but we're going to convert it into pounds because for most people, it makes absolutely no sense what that means, because we tend to think of pounds, not kilograms. The biggest one here, the next one, is dairy. And so with dairy, the biggest recommendation, so if you remember my plate, they had this plate, and they had, half of the plate was fruits and vegetables, and then dairy was kind of outside here, outside of the plate. Dairy's back in, right? It's basically, they're recommending 3 servings per day as part of a 2,000 calorie dietary pattern. And they're also recommending full fat dairy with no added sugars. All right. Right now, I'm just giving you the facts, and we're going to kind of go to the presentation and kind of look at these a little bit more in detail, but I wanted to show it to you in the actual document. As far as for fruits and vegetables, the biggest thing here is right here, 3 servings per day, and fruit 2 servings per day. If you notice, 3 servings of vegetables, basically saying to eat the same amount of dairy as vegetables every single day. Incorporating some healthy fats, some meats, poultry, eggs, omega-3 rich seafood, nuts, seeds, full fat dairy, olives, and avocados. Focus on whole grains, 2 to 4 servings per day of whole grains. So more whole grains than vegetables per day, going up to 4 servings a day. Limit highly processed foods, added sugars, and refined carbohydrates. I mean, most of the food pyramids over the last couple decades have been recommending a decrease in these ultra processed foods. Limit alcohol beverages, consume less alcohol for better overall health. So they basically took out, moderation used to be, a glass or two a day. There's no quantity here. It's just consume less alcohol for better overall health. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that when we go to the presentation, maybe why that is and why they put this in here, and what their justification is. And special populations, they talk about infants and breastfeeding, etc. And then they come down to, just wanted to point out one more thing here, and then we'll get to the presentation. Okay, vegetarian and vegans. So one of the things that they talk about is to pay careful attention to potential nutrient gaps when consuming a vegetarian or vegan diet. They could fall short of vitamin D, E, choline, iron. Vegan diets, shortfalls in vitamin A, D, E, B6, B12, riboflavin, niacin, choline, calcium, iron, magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, zinc, and protein. So this right here, we're going to talk a little bit about because this is extremely, extremely misleading. And I will show you why and some of the research to counter some of these this information here. So let me pull up my presentation. All right, so what we're going to cover, we're going to look at the recommendations, the fruit and vegetable servings, the dairy servings, alcohol consumption, protein, general myths. Going to give you some position statements for the world, and then really throughout the presentation, give you some guidelines on what we should be eating. So this is kind of common sense, right? I think one of the things that it gets right is just as we decrease processed and ultra processed foods and we add more unrefined plant foods into our diet, degenerative diseases decrease, right? So you can see the green is the amount or percentage of calories from unrefined plant foods. And then you can see red is the deaths by heart disease and cancer. And as you proportionally see an increase in the amount of unrefined plant foods, fruits, vegetables, intact whole grains, beans, nuts, seeds, legumes, mushrooms, you see a significant decrease in heart disease and cancer. So I think everybody is in agreement that we have to get rid of, Pop-Tarts and Twinkies and potato chips and all of these ultra processed foods with the seed oils and the added sugar and the added salts. They don't really serve a purpose in our diet except in very, very minute amounts. But when we look at the recommendations of 3 servings of vegetables and 2 servings of fruit, interestingly, there's really no science to back up what that recommendation, because there really is no upper limit, according to the research, as far as the addition of fruits and vegetables into the diet. Of course, there is an upper limit. There's only so much you can eat. But let's look at what the research says. And I have citations for every single thing that we're looking at here tonight. The Journal of Epidemiology, 2017, 2021, the British Medical Journal, Nutrition Review, just recently, 2025. But when you look at the recent large cohort studies, the meta-analyses and umbrella reviews, they demonstrate an inverse association between fruit and vegetable intake and all-cause mortality, with higher consumption linked to progressively lower risk. So in English, the more fruits and vegetables you eat, the lower your risk of all-cause mortality. So if we looked at just like one study, right, or a specific study out of this out of all of these cohorts in meta-analysis. One of the conclusions, this is from 2014, Fruit and Vegetable Consumption and Mortality, Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health, and the one below that is from 2017. But the conclusion is mortality risk decreases progressively with higher fruit and vegetable intake, with benefits extending to greater than 7 servings a day. A meta-analysis of 95 studies showed continued reduction in cardiovascular disease, cancer, and all-cause mortality up to 800 grams per day. That's roughly 8 to 10 servings. And then, this is just kind of a common sense point, but when you go and, I challenge you to go on PubMed and look to see if there's an inverse relationship to the amount of deli meat you eat, the amount of hot dogs you eat, the amount of hamburgers, chicken, ham, pork, if there's the same inverse relationship exists. And it doesn't, because when you eat more animal protein, and it shows that several observational studies and meta-analyses report the higher animal protein intake, particularly high poultry, because that's primarily what we eat. Americans are on a chicken diet. It's associated with increased all-cause and cardiovascular mortality, while higher plant protein intake is consistently associated with lower mortality risk, giving us two bits of information, signaling that the source of the protein matters tremendously, not only the quality, but also the quantity. We're going to move into dairy. And one of the things, they're making a recommendation to eat the same. So let me just back up for 1 second, kind of our conclusion for fruits and vegetables. When we look at the research, a better recommendation is really 5 to 10 plus servings of fruits and vegetables a day. That would be the more proper recommendation. Dairy, which I'm going to talk a little bit in a few slides down, but we even question whether or not, dairy is even or should be considered a food group. So we have lots of concerns with dairy. Okay. Number one is cancer risk. This is from the British Medical Journal, and then another study done in 2014, 2017. But multiple large observational studies and reviews link higher dairy intake, particularly milk, to increased risk of prostate cancer, likely mediated by insulin growth factor 1 and other hormone signaling. And this goes for breast and uterine and prostate, uterine and breast cancer, as well. And it just makes sense, right? Milk is designed to take an 80-pound animal calf and grow it to 1,200 to 15 pounds as an adult. It's got a lot of stuff in there for growth. And so it will go inside of our body and signal growth hormone, which then signals insulin growth factor to basically create not growth, but extraordinary growth, right? And so that's why there's a cancer risk. Dairy and autoimmunity, this has been well known in the literature, but dairy consumption is associated with autoimmunity, right? Early and regular cow's milk exposure has been associated with autoimmune conditions, particularly type 1 diabetes, through a mechanism that is called cellular mimicry. Dairy health concerns regarding hormone and growth signaling. Again, dairy consumption raises that IGF. It's a growth factor, which increases the risk of hormone-sensitive cancers and accelerates cellular proliferation. There's no biological requirement really for dairy. There's no essential nutrient in dairy that cannot be obtained from plant foods or fortified alternatives, calling into question, right, the need for dairy recommendations. And this is from Harvard and Mayo. And then when you look at the longest lived people, right, we've talked about this before, the most important studies in regards to human aging and longevity are the ones that have proven to show of increased longevity and aging, quality of life, quantity of life. And when you look at some of these studies, they consume little to no dairy, yet demonstrate exceptional longevity and low chronic disease rates, suggesting dairy is not necessary for long-term health. And then the last, this is the biggest myth probably of all, and this is from the Nurses Health Study, right? It's like large prospective studies show no protective association between dairy intake and fracture risk. In some cases, higher milk consumption is associated with increased fracture and mortality risk, suggesting dairy does not prevent osteoporosis. So why, right? Why do you see, like as an example, on the x-axis here, right, is dairy consumption, and on the y-axis is hip fracture per 100,000 people. And as you see, the countries with the highest intake of dairy, United States, Finland, Sweden, England, example, they have the highest rates of hip fracture. So one of the reasons is, yeah, dairy does contain calcium, but we're looking at net gain, right? So if you take in a food that's highly acidic, what the body does is it breaks down our own calcium to neutralize it. So the calcium is alkaline, it gets broken down to mitigate the acidic load, which then is peed out or excreted through the urine. So basically what happens, right, is that you get, even though, dairy has calcium in it, the result is a net loss of calcium because of its acidity. And this is from the British Medical Journal, 2014. Okay. Women who drink 3 or more glasses of milk per day have a 60% increased risk for developing a hip fracture. Drinking 3 or more glasses of milk also increased mortality risk by 93%. For each glass of milk, risk of dying from all-cause mortality increases by 15%. And then I just wanted to bring this on here because it is important, that we look at the reality of what it is we're consuming. So is dairy a food group? Well, not really. It's a fluid. It is a life stage specific biological fluid designed to take a newborn mammal and grow it as fast as it can. And you probably heard, but we really need to think about this. No species on Earth drinks milk after weaning, drinks milk from another species, and drinks milk for longevity or disease prevention. And not only that, the two basic logic flaws that I think of when I think about dairy is, first of all, if dairy is a food group, then logically, human breast milk would have to be a food group. Placenta could be considered a food group. Semen could be considered a food group because they all meet the same criteria dairy does. They're biological fluids, they contain nutrients, they're consumed in some contexts, and they serve a biological function. And then I think the biggest logic flaw is that, you know, it's just unnatural, right? So when you take a dairy cow, um, most people don't realize that, dairy and milk, right, is only produced when a cow is pregnant. So they impregnate the cow, they take the baby away, it goes to a veal crate, they milk it. Then the next year, they put it on a rape rack. That's what the industry calls it. They impregnate it again. They take the baby, and then it goes to the veal. They do that about 4, 5, 6 times. A typical dairy cow can live about 20 years, but about after 6 pregnancies or 6 years, it has the mastitis, and the milk production is so decreased that it just goes to slaughter. It's just completely unnatural. So whether or not we want to consider, dairy a food group, I think is really questionable, right? Whether or not it should even be considered in our food pyramid. Alcohol. So I was watching Dr. Oz. He was, up on the podium, and they were asking him about the alcohol. Why was he recommending a decrease, in alcohol? And there's no like numbers, like in the old food pyramid, it was, moderate. They recommended moderate consumption, maybe a glass or two a day. And he cited the blue zone studies because most of the longest lived people don't drink alcohol. Um, but it's really cherry picking because where are they getting the recommendations from? Right? Because he's using the blue zones to justify the recommendations for alcohol, but yet he's not using the blue zones to justify the recommendations for dairy or protein intake, which we'll see in just a minute. But it's a pretty large consensus at this point. Everything from the World Health Organization, the Lancet, that we can just read one of these here, but the WHO states clearly that no level of alcohol consumption is safe for our health, with risks beginning from the first drink and accumulating for cancer, liver disease, and other harms. And the same thing for that Lancet 2022 article. It contributes to health loss, disease, mortality with no identifiable threshold below which risk is eliminated. So they didn't say don't drink alcohol. They basically just said minimal. I think that is fair, because it would be hard to put on a food pyramid, don't drink any alcohol, although that's what the science points to. Really should be left for special occasions, but definitely not to be drank at any large quantity. There at this point is no organization, any health organization that I know of, that recommends drinking alcohol for any type of health benefit. That wasn't the case probably 10 years ago. And a lot of it had to do with research based on a gene called ApoE, because there are some genetic types that tolerate alcohol consumption more than others. But even in those cohorts that alcohol does have a favorable response on people's lipid profile, it does come with other negative consequences like oxidative stress and burden on the liver. But it is true, you'll see some studies out there that does show that some alcohol does have a positive effect on certain lipid profiles in some certain outliers of the population, about 10% of the population. So we had read, the recommendation to prioritize protein foods at every meal. And, most people in the US, protein is synonymous with animal products. So this recommendation is going to not get people to eat more beans. It's going to get more people to feel comfortable eating eggs for breakfast, eating a turkey sandwich, and having more chicken for dinner. And where this recommendation came from, I have absolutely no idea, because the countries with the highest annual meat consumption per capita in 2018, this was a statistic, was about 219 pounds per person per year, and the US leads the way. And if you look on the right, that's the low estimate. The high estimate is over 300 pounds per person per year. And they're telling recommendation to eat more protein. We are already eating way too much protein. If you look at per capita consumption of meat worldwide from 2019 to 2021, look all the way at the right, and this is in kilograms. You'll see 34 kilograms per person per year. That's the world, right? Around 34. And if you look all the way on the left there, you'll see United States is at 98, North America, 98, 99 kilograms. So we lead the entire world in the amount of meat consumption. And there's a huge, influence, of course, with meat consumption and all-cause mortality, leading to cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, and you name it. And so the recommendation should be to lower meat consumption, not to increase it. And one thing that was um, very upsetting not to see in the recommendations is the fact that 90, and you can't get around this fact, okay? 99% of all animal products in the US are factory farm. So, Dr. Oz, uh, anybody who's in the health department is going to say, yes, factory farmed animal products are no good. We want you to get regenerative, animal products. We want you to get, farmed fish. We want to get all of the things that you should be getting. But look at the statistics, right? 99.96% of chickens are factory farmed in the US. I don't care what the label says, 9.2 billion chickens, right, every year are from factory farms. 100% of farm fish are factory farmed. That is only 530 million. Egg laying hens, 98%, 99% of turkeys, 75% of cows, they only make up 66 million, and then 98% of pigs. But if you look at chickens, right, that's why I say, the United States is on a chicken diet. That's 9 billion. All the rest maybe equate to another, billion. So 10 billion. Out of that 10 billion, 9 billion are chickens. So when you look at the math here, 99% of all of the animal products that we eat are coming from factory farms. And we there's no surprise that there's an increase, right, of newly emerging infectious diseases, and they're zoonotic, meaning they come from animals to people, right? When you mass confine pigs, you get the swine flu. When you mass confine chickens, you get the avian flu. When you mass confine cows, you get mad cow's disease. When you deforest, the chimp's habitat for bushmeat, you get AIDS. In the seafood, the wholesale market in China, and the trappings of the bats, there's a possible link to COVID. But 60% of all infectious diseases in humans are spread from animals. So this is a chart I made up just to show you the recommendations of protein that's being recommended at this point. And I did the conversion, but the new recommendation is 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. The old was 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight per day. So I did some conversion and converting it into protein per gram of pound. Okay, so if you look at some of the most well-respected longevity studies, you look at the China study, the Blue Zones, and the Adventist health studies, you'll see that they're recommending roughly ratios of 0.35 to 0.4 grams per pound. What that equates to in dietary protein percentage of the calories that you're eating every day is roughly about 10% of your calories should be coming from protein, right? If you're eating primarily in all of these China, Blue, and the Adventist health studies, their protein source dominant was primarily plant-based. So you can see that equates to grams for like a 150-pound person is roughly in that 50 grams of protein per day. And if you look at on the red, if you look at the old RDA, that's pretty much in alignment. They only had they didn't have a range. So they had basically, if you convert, the 0.8 grams of protein, it comes out to about 0.36 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. That's roughly 10%, very similar, to the China, Blue Zones, and Adventist health study. But the protein source is coming from animal primarily, where in the longevity studies, the protein source is coming from plants primarily. And the 10% I think is a good starting point if we have elderly population, if we have athletes, if we have lactation and other things that require slightly larger increases in protein. Yeah, that 10-15% is probably a really healthy range, and it's consistent with the science. But when you look at the new lower and the new upper range, right, they're asking you to eat upwards of over 100 grams in the same scenario, mostly from animal protein sources. And when you look again at the science, it's going to have a disease orientation rather than a health orientation. And again, we come back to this slide here, right? We're looking at a very simple idea that as we add more unrefined plant foods into the diet, there's no upper limit, we get a decrease in all degenerative diseases. So do plants-based diets cause nutrition deficiencies, right? So what does the research say? Deficiencies are associated with poorly planned or ultra-processed diets, not whole food plant-based diets. So, when we open up the door to have a discussion, right? I don't really have discussions with people about, diets that look like cereal for breakfast with processed, plant-based milk. And then for lunch, they're eating, fake meats, fake cheeses. And then dinner is a bowl of pasta and some bread. We're talking about oatmeal with blueberries and nuts. We're talking about hummus and carrots. We're talking about salads and avocados and beans and sweet potatoes and tubers and mushrooms. Like, we're talking about real food. And so a lot of the research is skewed because most studies do not distinguish between junk food vegans and whole food plant-based eaters. Major nutrition authorities agree that well-planned plant-based diets are nutritionally adequate for all stages of life. And common concerns like B12, iron, omega-3 are planning and supplementation issues, not evidence against a plant-based diet. And then when you look at the standard American diet, they're loaded with nutritional deficiencies. And that is oftentimes always overlooked. And basically people point their finger to, one or two nutrients like B12 and D, when the typical American is deficient in most nutrients because they're not even eating 1, 2, 3 servings of vegetables a day. I'm not going to read all of these, but I just want to show you again what the science is saying, right? If you look at the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics in the United States, right? This is a position paper of 2016. Appropriately planned vegetarian and vegan diets are nutritionally adequate, healthful, and appropriate for all stages of the life cycle: pregnancy, infancy, childhood, adulthood, and athletics. Same with the American Heart Association, same thing with the American Cancer Society. When you look at the dietitians of Canada, same thing. Well-planned vegetarian and vegan diets are nutritionally adequate and appropriate at all stages of life, including pregnancy, infancy, and adolescence. Same thing with the British Dietetic Association, European Society of Cardiology. If you look at American College of Lifestyle Medicine, that teaches your doctors about holistic medicine. Plant predominant nutrition is a core pillar of lifestyle medicine. Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, the World Cancer Research Fund, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the Lancet, right, concluded that predominantly plant-based diets are not only optimal for human health, but planetary health, supporting adequate nutrition across the lifespan. So when you look across continents, disciplines, nutrition, cardiology, oncology, pediatrics, lifestyle medicine, they all agree that well-planned plant-based diets are safe and adequate and health promoting throughout a human lifespan. So the foundation of healthy eating, when you look at what should we be eating, we should be eating unrefined plant-based materials, right? So fruits and vegetables, intact grains, healthy fats like olives, olive oil, coconut, avocado, nuts, seeds, and their butters and milks, beans, lentils, and peas, mushrooms, and tubers, right? All different types of potatoes. And we should be eliminating all processed food, ultra processed food, and factory farmed animal products. And that's the diet that is going to take us really to the foundation of healthy eating and increasing our longevity. So I want to thank you guys for attending, and I do want to open it up to comments, uh, questions, disagreements, anything that you guys want to share. So let me just stop sharing my screen here.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. So I looked at the addendum for this new FDA guidelines in the main paper which you presented, Dr. Ripoli. Thank you for presenting it very well. It does not list, but if you look at the addendum, the SMEs, the subject matter experts who are listed, I counted 7 of them have ties to animal slaughter, animal secretion, and the big pharma industry. So there is that influence. And they have the section on vegans, and they don't cite any references to it. My question is, I saw in the news this afternoon, we have a physician who was obviously promoting her book, and she was recommending this new guidelines and people eating protein from animal sources. So what can we do to have this corrected now? Because everybody's, well, most of the people who have hidden agenda are going to cite these guidelines, as you mentioned, and promote animal slaughter or animal secretions product, which is very conflicting, because even the guideline says keep the saturated fat less than 10%. But if we're eating animal products, how can you keep the saturated fat less than 10%? What can ordinary people do to correct this misinformation?
I'm really thankful that the Blue Zones, documentary and research has come like full circle, because I think that to me seems like the easiest thing for people to understand, right? The longest lived people did what? Tell me. And you tell them. And I think that's like the easiest thing to understand, because it doesn't matter what research study that you look at, Sally Fallon research, from all of these different researches that people are going to potentially be citing, because you can use research to cite anything that you want to, right? About anything that you believe. You'll find information to support it. You truly will. But what did the longest lived people do? And there is a confluence, right? Their diet is 90+% plant centric, and that is across the board. And so that is kind of the way that I usually present it, to patients, is just that understanding, is that it's common sense. I mean, I think the whole idea that, you don't see studies that show increasing your chicken consumption decreases your rates of cancer. It just doesn't exist. I mean, and the other thing I usually tell people too is, you have cancer intuitively. Are you going to eat a steak, or are you going to do green juice? And intuition, usually, when they answer that question, somehow they intuitively know they need to go to the fruits and vegetables, and probably not the cut of meat, right? So the same thing that would treat is now the same thing that prevents. And I think that that's a big concept that's sometimes lost on the population. Like, if I were to do it when I'm in my worst, what happens if you do it when you're not at your worst? Will it prevent you, right? So I think it's important to use in a world today where we live, where facts don't matter. They really don't matter. I think it makes more sense to use rules of reasonableness and common sense when talking to people about nutrition.
And the other thing I wanted to add about the Dan Buettner Blue Zone study is the fact that it's also a study that's done on the longest lived people, but the longest lived people who have great health also, meaning they're not just living to 100 and being, older and falling to pieces. They're actually out still gardening and doing and functioning at that later age. And I think that that's actually another thing to shine a light on how powerful that study is, because somebody can be older and not necessarily be in great health. So that's a really powerful piece too to pull in when you're talking to somebody if they're not sure about the new, food regulations and stuff like that. What creates that longevity, but what also creates you to have good health with the longevity. So yeah. And then I think Jody has his hand up one more time. And then Miss Suzanne, if you want to come on there after that, you can.
I see Maria has her
And yeah.
hand up. Go ahead, Maria.
Thank you, Doctor. It was a great presentation. I totally agree with what you were just saying about the intuitiveness. As an intuitive myself, I think that's one area of education that we need to kind of focus on with people, is for them to start trusting and listening more to their bodies and what they're feeling called, as you said, what they're feeling called to eat. And then when they do eat, listening and noticing, observing how their body is reacting to what they're putting in their body. But my question was, when it comes to the dairy, does that, I understand the milk component. What about for people who are, cheese lovers, or for the yogurt? How widespread is that no dairy?
So most of the studies I just showed you were done on milk. If you take milk and you make cheese out of it, right, everything that I presented is 10 times worse, right? Because cheese is condensed, right? Casein and whey and all of the constituents in there is going to be more concentrated. So it's actually worse, right? And dairy, the benefits of dairy come from the bacteria. And you can take bacteria and ferment it with anything. You could take the bacteria and ferment it with almond milk. You can take it and ferment it with soybeans to make, tempeh. You can sauerkraut and all sorts of different things. So the benefit doesn't come from the dairy. So like yogurts and things like that, the benefit isn't coming from the dairy. It's actually coming from the bacteria. It's just a medium. So you can use a healthier medium to grow the bacteria. But yes, unfortunately, with cheese, I know that's a really tough one for a lot of people. Now, we just got gifted a box of cheese from, where was it, Amanda?
Rebel cheeses, I want to say, and
Yeah.
they're a veg company too. That theirs is based out of the fermentation of cashews.
And oh my
And
God, they were fantastic. And so that's,
that was the
there
closest.
are alternatives when you go to Publix and try to get alternatives for cheese. I mean, they're not good. They're
No.
actually unhealthy because there's a lot of seed oils and other types of processing in them. But the Rebel cheese that we got, I mean, it's all natural ingredients, and most of it is made from cashews. So the good news is that there are better alternatives. When I started, I've been plant-based and for over 20 years, 25 years. And so one of the things that at that time, I mean, there really wasn't anything that was of any good quality taste. But today there's some really amazing alternatives that hopefully it won't feel like deprivation, to kind of make that switch over.
And I
Thank
have,
you.
yeah, and I have to say, because you brought in the piece about the intuition too, and I feel like it's inspired people to be more creative because they're not using the standard kind of mediums to make things. So I think that's also brought up like that intuition, that love for the planet, that love for people's body, and them being also a creative expression because now they can replicate something that they love and make it from something natural and from the earth. So it's actually a beautiful thing on so many spectrums. So.
That's the new course, creative culinary.
Yeah, that's a good one. I love it. Intuitive kitchen.
Thank you. Yeah, the intuitive kitchen. There you go.
This is Tammy. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, Tammy.
Okay. Hi. My question is based on calorie intake. When you eliminate meats, when you eliminate dairy, cheeses, etc., and now you're going to try to eat 10 servings of vegetables. Let's face it, a serving of vegetables, you might get 35 calories, depending on what it is. So how do you keep from just on that downward spiral of losing weight, trying to at least maintain a 1,400 calorie day and they're still basing everything on 2,000 calories. So what's the strategy for trying to figure that out?
Yeah, good question. There's a lot of confusion of, food groups, calories based on calories or by volume. And so when you talk about 5 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables a day, by volume, you're eating more fruits and vegetables than you are any other food, for the day, right? By volume. By calories, definitely not, right? So that's where the sweet potatoes come in, and the beans, and the rice, and the nuts and seeds, and, the other foods. So it's not that, when you compare, one to the other, right? You got to eat the same volume. It's calories. And the cool thing is, right? So like I've been the same weight for like 15, 20 years, right? I eat 3,000 calories one day and then 2,000 calories one day. I fast for one day and 2 days, and then I eat a lot more. Then I go out to eat. The body will figure it out. It's eating, when you eat whole foods, unrefined plant-based foods, to your satiation, you're going to get roughly the amount of calories you need for the day. And interestingly, you really will never go below 10% of your calories for the entire day. 10% of your calories will always come from protein. It's impossible to design a plant-based diet, whole food plant-based diet, if you're getting the right amount of calories for the day, to be under 10% of its calories coming from protein. Impossible. There's no protein deficiency. And so the key is to make sure that not only are you eating, and people think 5 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables is a lot, right? But a salad is 5 servings right there, right? I mean, you could take the salad and cut it up, and it's like a couple handfuls. You could have 3, 4 servings right there. You make a smoothie and you put a couple cups of, berries in there. There's another 2, 3. You snack on carrots, and you basically, you're right there, right? And so then you would be eating the beans and the nuts and the seeds and the other foods to make up for, what fruits and vegetables lack in calories, they give you in nutrient density. And where the other foods, come to save the day is really in the caloric intake for the energy and the fuel.
One more question, Dr. Rapoli. Consider the new food group. Is anyone like in the functional medicine space doing anything to neutralize the effects of what may happen with the new food group? I mean, like publicly.
You mean the new guidelines, or are you talking about dairy?
Yeah, the new guidelines, yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, throughout history, the health world has ignored the USDA guidelines.
Mhm.
This is going to be the first time in history, meaning recent history, the last 20, 30, 40 years or so, where you're going to have the majority of health experts giving a little bit of a nudge and a hurrah to the food pyramid. And Francesca just, or I think it was Francesca just put up, yeah, there are organizations like the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. I'm not, haven't been following them for a while, but they're usually right on top of, helping physicians in giving them literature and information to kind of help disperse the right type of, food pyramid. But this food pyramid, there's a lot of health authorities that are okay because it's moving into this paleo style type of eating, but with one major flaw that I pointed out that you can't get around. You cannot get around. 99% of all animal products in the United States are not paleo. And so that's a big problem. That's a big problem in trying to promote this type of diet. It's just not feasibly possible. There's not enough land mass to make sure that everybody eats the way they're recommending. It's just not possible.
Okay. It's a business. Animal products is a business,
Yeah.
so that's what it boils down to.
I think then Francesca posted too, Dr. Greger, I think, has been posting a lot of stuff too. He's another one that's like a plant-based advocate and doctor and stuff like that. So
yeah, Jody pointed out, which is so true if you haven't looked at the chat there. But yeah, now the biggest issue with the food, recommendations is now that your schools, your prisons, your governments, hospitals, all of their are going to have, they're required to follow the guidelines. So children are required to eat 3 servings of dairy a day. Contrary to what the research states about its risks for cancer and heart disease. Yeah, so that's unfortunate.
Not a question. I just had a overarching thought. How, when you think about food and what should you eat or what shouldn't you eat, the way people live, they go to the store, something is wrapped in a ton of plastic wrap on a plastic tray, just like we're talking about crackers and things. And it's so important to just take a step back and appreciate nature. And when we do that, we realize that the soil must be good, what we're planting, the seeds must be good. And when we live on a farm like I did growing up, it was incredible, all of the food that we had that was the most delicious, wonderful food you could imagine. That's what we're talking about. We can use all the fancy words, but how good is it? Is it from nature, and is it going to nourish us, give us what we need to have health? That's what food is all about.
Yeah, I can't agree. I mean, I so agree with that, Suzanne. And I think that's the take-home message tonight, is that their message is beautiful, right? Eat more real food. The question is, what are we defining as real food? And I hope that everybody just coming off of this webinar will demonize, the 2 food groups that we've been demonizing, since the beginning of time: processed food and factory farmed animal products. They do not deserve any spot in our diet. They're Frankenstein foods, right? These, especially ultra processed foods. I'll just say ultra processed foods, right? These are these, foods like the Twinkies and things like that, right? They don't belong in our diet. And factory farmed animal products don't either. And I think because of, this food pyramid, that's out there and promotion, I think it's going to encourage people to eat more factory farmed animal products. And because there's a greater demand, the amount of, animal products that are regenerative, or in quotes, regenerative, right, are going to become less and less because the demand rises greater and greater. And it's just a numbers game.
And I feel like I love the intuition that everybody has brought in, because it's so true that the simpler that we keep it, it's just easier on the body, it's easier on the planet. It's just such a beautiful relationship that we have with the food and our environment. And I would say keeping it simple is the key to health. So that's kind of one of my takeaways for tonight, is just try to keep it ultra simple. And if you take it back to the garden, that's the most simplest form that the body recognizes. So